Hugo, why am I glad that I'm not editing this question?
I suspect that this might have something to do with Jimmy Savile.
Yeah, I'd keep coughing if I was you.
Yeah. My main concern about the whole Jimmy Savile fuss is that as an employee of News International, I'm just really, really keen and at pains to treat BBC employees unconnected to the scandal with every bit of the kind of respect and tact that the BBC treated people like me during the phone hacking scandal. Because it can't be easy for employees of the BBC being the foot soldiers of a mafia state and having their entire morality compromised every time they accept a paycheck, as is obviously the case. So it's important to be compassionate in this respect, and I'm prepared to be so.
You do know what show you're doing, Hugo, don't you?
So was Murdoch a pedo as well? Is that what you're trying to tell us? That was a very roundabout way of saying it, Hugh.
No.
Just come out with it.
No, darling, he's Australian. He wears Speedo. It's a completely different thing.
The Savile thing is basically soaring in two directions now. Firstly, you've got the accusations about Jimmy Savile himself, that the subject of one inquiry, and the idea that there might have been a paedophile ring at the BBC, which is it's a fascinating term, paedophile ring. I sort of think of it as being like a bull ring, but where you wave dolls at paedophiles and they charge at you and then you stab them to death with a sword or something. so there's one inquiry into that, and the other, and there's another one into Newsnight. There was a Newsnight investigation into Jimmy Savile and sex crimes, and it was shelved, it was parked, it was not broadcast at around the same time that the BBC was broadcasting Christmas tributes to the recently late Jimmy Savile. And there's terrible fuss about who knew what when, because obviously this is a far more serious matter than somebody abusing children.
And the BBC Newsnight was then investigated by the BBC's Panorama.
Yeah, and now being discussed by the BBC's Newsquiz.
Yeah.
One of the major problems with this is that for years, people interested in promoting child safety have been at pains to emphasise that sometimes a child abuser is the last person you would suspect. Well, this has rather blown that idea out of the water, hasn't it? Because, Newsnight was pulled because it might have suggested that possibly Jimmy Savile was a paedophile. I think that suggestion was made over the 40 years that the BBC put him on television more or less every day, whether or not anybody wanted to see him. This completely uncharismatic, untalented, dysfunctional man. Nobody knows why he was ever given a series in the first place. The Director General didn't know. Every dog on the street knew. Because dogs have sixth sense, but unfortunately their communication skills are very limited. So people saying, "What's that, lassie? Skippy's fallen down the old mine shaft." "No, Savile, a paedophile." "What? What's that? What's that, lassie? Savile, a paedophile, and he's not the only one." "What? What? How much more of a child abuser could you look like than Jimmy Savile, for God's sake?"
His whole CV read like something from Forrest Gump. Like, he's got a papal knighthood.
Because the Catholic Church has been very good record on child.
It's called hiding in plain sight. I knew a chap who was a drug dealer who decided that the more he looked like a drug dealer, the less he would get arrested. He didn't quite see it through. It's odd, though. The Daily Mail are clearly implying that it is the fault of the BBC, because they're clearly saying that Jimmy Savile was quite a nice, mild-mannered chap, but as soon as he stepped inside the BBC, something just clicked.
The bit I don't... Just to help me with the newspaper thing here, Hugo, because newspapers have gone on about not having statutory regulation because they must keep their investigative journalism powers. How come nobody in the 40 years of the newspapers had a look at it at all? Why is everybody just blaming the BBC?
Yeah, no answer. I mean, you can look at that the other way around. You can say, what's the point in regulation when the BBC, that's the most highly regulated bit of the media, still managed to have a failure like this? But again, I'm talking about the Newsnight thing rather than the Savile thing. I mean, you can't really regulate against that as such. Basically, people are focusing and obsessing about the Newsnight thing and the journalistic failings, which did happen. But because it's much easier to think about that and write about that and look into that and find someone to blame for that. And it's very hard to find someone to blame for stuff that happened 30 years ago, especially when he's dead.
It's not so much the Newsnight stuff, it's that they still put the tribute on. If they just cancelled the tribute, then I think it'd be 0-0 again. But it was sort of...
No, they should have
not
shown
only
both.
are we not going to take it seriously, what you're telling us...
They should have shown both.
Put
both on, and we can all decide. We can all make our mind up.
Vote with the red button.
Vote with the red button.
Hero or pedo, you decide.
Go behind the red, yeah.
Last Tuesday, the Director General of the BBC, George Entwistle, was questioned by MPs on the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee about why a Newsnight investigation into Jimmy Savile was shelved last year. The editor of Newsnight, Peter Rippon, is currently on sabbatical while the BBC investigates why he didn't report his suspicions earlier. 5 Live presenter Victoria Derbyshire sent a tweet asking if every BBC employee who made a poor editorial decision would be treated like Peter Rippon, and I hope the answer is yes, because I could do with a holiday. Just so we're all really clear, this programme is being edited by Lindsay Fenner, who reports to her executive producer